Well, greetings from the ancestral home of the Wabanaki people, the people of the dawn here in the state of Maine. My name's Joel Clement, and I am delighted to be kicking off this session today. I wanted to step outside just to show you guys some snow, just in case it still hasn't snowed in Tromsø. Hopefully it has by now. I'm particularly excited about this session because it's the future of the Arctic we're always talking about, and we don't talk enough about the people who are going to be driving change in the future Arctic, and that's the youth and the early career folks. So this is a great session. I'm looking forward to seeing more about what people have to say. So what is this Arctic that's going to transform? What is it going to become? What's this future Arctic that we frequently talk about? I was startled to realize when I thought about it that by the time today's 20-year-olds, or my age, which means just hitting their stride, it'll be the year 2055. At that point, if we do our job right now, the rate of warming in the Arctic should have peaked. This is not to say that the Arctic will start to cool and eventually get back to normal, because that's not going to happen, not on a time frame relevant to human society. But this rate of change, which is currently accelerating at such an alarming pace, should begin to slow if we do our jobs now. Now, in 2055, having grown up with rapid change, never knowing the old status quo, they'll know what they're up against, and will have developed new systems to thrive in a warmer, wetter, greener, browner Arctic. They'll know how to minimize the damage from wildfire. They'll have protocols to protect the lands and waters from invasive species. They'll have learned how to ensure freshwater security and better anticipate and predict what have become highly uncertain wildlife migrations. Indigenous communities, supported by a society finally attuned to social justice, will have achieved equal status, legal preferences, and unassailable land rights, and be known as the climate change innovators of the North, partly because an influx of new resilience investments helped unleash the powers of indigenous ways of knowing and being. New sources of financial capital will be drawn to the warming Arctic. Public infrastructure in the North will be world-class, and communities, the heart and soul of the Arctic that were so stressed by the pandemics of the early 2020s, will be just as connected to the internet, health, education, entertainment, and political opportunities as Paris or London. Search and rescue capacity will be widespread, and development will be enhanced and improved through the use of ecosystem-based approaches. The vast open spaces of the Arctic will have attracted an influx of new arrivals, some of whom bring important skills such as healthcare and education, others who bring much-needed tourist revenue, and thanks to a tourism strategy that was developed in partnership with Indigenous people that protects areas of cultural value and minimizes impacts. The Arctic will be powered by renewable energy sources, and fossil fuel infrastructure of the past will be converted to server farms and energy storage facilities. There'll still be extractive industry, but it'll focus on rare earth metals rather than fossil fuels, and it'll be tightly regulated to ensure that ecosystem and social impacts are rare and local jobs are abundant. It'll be a very different Arctic, but given the circumstances, one that the people of the Arctic can thrive in. The open lands and waters will still retain the remote wildness that makes the Arctic so unique, and communities will enjoy a cultural renaissance as preserved languages are once again taught in schools and the old ways are adapted to a new climate. Now, obviously some of this is fantasy, and I fully admit that the version I just gave you, that vision I just gave you, may not reflect all your interests and priorities, but I do think it's time to start imagining our own success. Right now, for example, the Arctic is enjoying an Indigenous moment. While it may not feel like it to some, Indigenous voices are becoming more prominent, and non-Indigenous leaders are starting to listen. And I'd hate to think this is as far as we get, that we just stop here. So by envisioning social justice and a truly post-colonial society in 2055, it's clear we need to work right now, hard, to open this Indigenous moment into an era. Social justice demands that we do that, starting now. Now, how do we get there? First off, we listen to the youth. Some of you know that the Arctic Council's second Resilience Forum took place this fall over the course of 10 weeks, hosted by the Arctic Council, the Icelandic chairmanship of the Arctic Council. And the first session was devoted to Indigenous youth leadership. We had an impressive lineup of youth. They talked about what they worry about, what leadership means to them, how they learn, and how they want to be heard. We heard him talk about the suicide epidemic, fear of losing languages, concerns about an influx of people into the Arctic as it warms, threats to land and culture. They talked very specifically about climate impacts and the role of democracy. We saw how they developed games and simulations that teach leadership and other innovations for building community. They talked about the importance of engaging, of getting involved, and of stepping forward. We heard about the honor and duty of serving both their elders and the next generation, and the importance of envisioning an Arctic that they and we can be proud of. Now, I had a couple of take-homes from that session. First, we have to stop being surprised when youth voices bring smart and important new issues to the fore. They're truly on the ball. Second, the youth feel and see social ills differently than us aged folks. We try to plan into the future because it's strategic, but for the youth, it's out of necessity. That changes their point of view, and it's important. As obvious as this may seem, this, however, has not historically led to a seat at the table for youth voices for the most part, and this needs to change. For example, getting back to the issue of colonialism, I'd like to think, but I don't know that my generation can achieve a truly post-colonial vision. But I'm darn sure that those youth that we heard from in that session of the Resilience Forum can do that if given the space and the resources to do so. So here, I'll get into some recommendations and try and stimulate your discussions over the course of today's session. I'll narrow it down to 5 recommendations for thought. First of all, resilience, predictably. Resilience is not just another buzzword, or it's not a synonym for climate adaptation. Rather, it describes the enabling conditions and quality of relationships between interconnected social and ecological systems that allow them to best recover and thrive through crises and shocks. Indigenous knowledge and decades of research show that fostering these conditions makes for more resilient communities. For example, communities that are empowered to make decisions that are supported with critical infrastructure and leadership are better able to withstand stress and uncertainty. So use the tools that resilience provides. Look at the interconnections among issues. Determine the shared enabling conditions that can solve more than one thing at a time, and light them up with resources. Recommendation number 2, leadership. Leadership is one of those enabling conditions, and it doesn't come along by accident. Sure, there are some natural leaders out there, and we heard from some of them in the Resilience Forum sessions. With any luck, they'll find opportunities to engage and help, but it shouldn't come down to luck. And most leaders go through their lives never knowing their potential. We need to be more deliberate about fostering leadership in the Arctic. And this means training, mentoring, making spaces for youth voices. And trust me, there is a huge demand for this. The Arctic is teeming with youth eager to learn and lead. By the time you see this video, we will have concluded the James McCarthy Leadership Seminar for Arctic Indigenous Youth in partnership with the Association of World Reindeer Herders and UArctic. And we hope to train 15 to 20 young leaders in the program, but we had twice that number sign up right out of the gate from every corner of the Arctic, every time zone. So clearly we need to expand such programs and then provide entry points into society for these new leaders. Third recommendation, Indigenous knowledge. Indigenous ways of knowing are and will be essential to navigating rapid change in the Arctic. I've been clear in my writings that I feel that Indigenous knowledge holds the key to thriving through the mysteries and uncertainties we face as a result of rapid Arctic change. But even if you feel Western science holds all the answers, you have to acknowledge that we simply can't achieve social justice or equity through Western science alone, or by partitioning Indigenous knowledge away from Western science, particularly in a time of rapid transformation. So we need to explore pathways to the co-production of knowledge that honor and elevate Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous knowledge holders in Arctic society. Recommendation number 4, public service. Look, I know all civil society plays an essential role in navigating change and achieving our shared vision of a thriving Arctic, but in my opinion, not enough of our best and brightest are choosing public service. And by public service in this case, I mean working within public institutions, the governments and agencies making decisions about how and for what we live our lives. These institutions need leaders and innovators. They need future casters. They need dedicated staff to ensure that misguided politicians can't just seize the reins and drive it all into the ditch. We've recently seen how that can happen. In my view, there is no higher calling. It doesn't have to be a career, but it could be part of a career. And as a lifelong NGO guy, it definitely opened my eyes to how change can happen. And frankly, despite all I learned, I think it is the best way to lead change in society today. You may be doing incredible work in the nonprofit, academic, or private sectors, and keep it up. But consider bringing your skills into public service, at least for a time. And fifth and last, we need to shake off at every opportunity the way we do things in the Arctic. It's a new Arctic now. and change is accelerating beyond the ability of existing structures to keep pace. When I first learned about resilience about 20 years ago, what struck me in the adaptive models was the degree to which rigidity increased risk. We don't need to cast everything aside. That would be counterproductive, but we do need to add flexibility where we can. The Arctic Council, as an elastic and adaptable institution, would be well positioned to influence climate change or positive change, for example. But as a rigid and unchanging edifice, it would hold back progress. I happened to be watching the excellent Ken Burns documentary on the U.S. Civil War this week, and this quote from Abraham Lincoln, who can hardly be considered a radical rabble-rouser, really stuck with me related to this issue. He said, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country." So not to state the obvious, but without question, it's the youth who are best positioned to disenthrall themselves from the quiet dogmas of the past and explore new approaches unconstrained by convention. It's our job to pave the way so they can get to work on that as soon as possible. Every time I'm asked what gives me hope during dark moments, I always say the same thing. It's the youth. Whether it's climate change or other issues, the youth have really inspired us, particularly over the last couple of years. It's past time we stopped relying upon them for hope and offer some in return. So rather than expecting them to light us up, let's light them up in every way we can so that they can eclipse us with their success. Thanks so much for the opportunity to say a few things. Enjoy the rest of the day's program and all of the Arctic Frontiers Conference. Thanks so much.